Hello, everyone. My name is Lola Dada-Olley. And before we get going into partnering with the generational mindset, I thought we'd do some level setting. So, like many of you, I wear many hats: attorney, advocate, content creator, lifetime caregiver, all of the things, as the kids say, all of the things. So, the content creator side of me, our family launched the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast in 2020 because we thought the pandemic would be a really good time to launch such a thing. And it takes listeners through a multi-generational journey through autism and intellectual disability. Some of these episodes do include resources that were available and maybe not so available along the way. So I stand before you as someone who's made some observations a time or two. What I've seen is that it's very clear that the main consumers of the US special education system in general, are the students. But the families and the communities tied to those students are the beneficiaries. And I stand before you as a beneficiary of that system. And I've learned through a span of over 30 years, which I know you're all looking at me like, oh, she must be 32. But I've learned over a span of 30 years that employing a generational mindset is key to the interconnectivity of society's systems. Generational mindset thinking. What is it? It's thinking with legacy in mind prospectively, breaking down silos that are inherent in the everyday. I got you on the silos. You're going to see silos a couple more times. So breaking down the silos inherent in the everyday. It's seeing how your role is integrated into the bigger picture. So, to further underscore, I know there are educators in the room. I got you some use cases based on lived experience, spanning over 30 years. Because again, I'm 32 and a half. The first use case, autism and intellectual disability in isolation, and I put that in quotes, and I'll explain to you why. It involves the star of our family show, the blueprint of our modern day advocacy efforts, Lola Dada, a man now in his 30s, and my baby brother. Whew. It was the worst of times, it was the worst of times. It was an autism diagnosis and intellectual disability diagnosis in 1989. So pre-social media, pre-autism awareness and acceptance campaigns. And that's important to note because families who have those things today, they know they're not alone. But we were lulled into the lie that families that looked like us were alone. This diagnosis threw our family for a loop because a year plus before that, Kunle was speaking in full sentences, great eye contact, he was a man of the people, and then one day he just stopped talking and we would never hear his voice again. Now, doctors didn't know what to tell us. My parents didn't know what to tell us. I remember my parents sometimes explaining to people, oh, he's hyperactive. But beyond that, they didn't really know what to say. For the podcast, I talked to my dad about what those early days looked like. This was the late 80s. Autism wasn't nearly as well known as it is now. Doctors at the time weren't exactly well known for giving out autism diagnoses or any form of neurodiversity that was outside that of the neurotypical, right? My dad, now in his 70s, still remembers the reaction of Kunle's pediatrician.
Well, the pediatrician, our pediatrician that time, told us Mr. and Mrs. Dada, you either have a problem in your hand or you have a genius, because they didn't know what the problem was.
Not exactly a roadmap to next steps for two parents with questions that clearly needed answering. My dad was on the phone. It was the start of the pandemic. I was still teaching this man how to use Zoom, so apologies for the audio. But let me reiterate what he said. The medical specialist at the time told him, it's either you have a problem on your hands or you have a genius. Not exactly helpful. Which brings us to communication. Now, within the backdrop of autism and intellectual disabilities sat a first-generation American family. So while my parents worked extremely hard to raise us, they were also sending money back home to extended family in Nigeria. So you can imagine that level of pressure, paying for school fees abroad and housing and food. Now we have fancy terms for that, like survivor's remorse, but that's a whole nother speech. We'll talk about that another time. So in my culture, we don't really speak about disability, especially at that time. It's getting a lot better now, but at that time we didn't really speak about it. And I also come from a culture where we don't really speak about anything publicly that could take on some type of negative connotation to the family. So when you look at it from that cultural perspective, my parents didn't really have the tools needed to fully communicate the level of support they really needed. There's even a famous Nigerian song called Suffering and Smiling, and that's what my parents were doing. Healthcare communication took on a different form. My parents are very well educated. My dad's a pharmacist, my mom's a registered nurse. When it came to exchanging clinical jargon, it wasn't a problem. But now we understand that it wasn't that level of communication that was the issue. It was the fully understanding that they were not clinicians, they were parents. So grief played a major role in the background. So me as the oldest child, immigrant family, I would follow my parents to IEP meetings. I took on the role of a third parent and watched my brother participate in the special education system through his early 20s. Transitions. I watched a little boy turn into an adolescent, turn into a young adult in the system. And for that time, those teachers were well-resourced, they were dedicated, they did what they could. They tried to teach my brother PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System, and sign language. But unfortunately, we're not exactly sure why, but he wasn't always able to retain what was taught to him. So we had a situation where as he grew more frustrated in his ability to communicate. And when you're a young boy and you're frustrated, that can still be maintained, but as you grow older, the frustration can look like aggression. And at the time, there weren't the tools in place to fully address those needs. So when it was time to now transition to adult transition services, the services available were few and far between, and services dwindled. So my baby brother's world shrunk. Again, now we have these terms to explain what was happening, but we're a family that sits at the intersection of race, disability, neurodivergence, and the immigrant experience. And sometimes when those worlds collide, it feels like life is extra hard to stomach. One day, decades ago, my two younger brothers were driving around in our neighborhood, which was nearly an all-white suburb. And let's just say it was a police stop that would change the three of us.
Okay, so basically, yeah, I just got my license maybe like a year or two, still a relatively new driver. Just driving around. At that time, Kunle had liked to, and just like right now, he likes to just go out and, and drive around and just see different routes and just see just the scenery and listen to music and dance and whatever have you. So we were just driving around on one of those typical, like, I believe it was like a late afternoon. We were driving around and, and like I said, I just got my license, so everything was by the book. as far as like, stopping at stop signs, making sure you're behind the white line or whatever. So everything's by the book. And I made a turn, I believe. And I was just driving down the street, and it was like still like off in like in one of the subdivisions. And all of a sudden the police come, and we were jamming, like we had the music on, Kunle was dancing, and we were just having a good time. And the music came on, or I'm sorry, the police came and stopped us. And they asked you for the typical like license and registration and whatnot. And I don't even think I even asked them like, why am I being stopped or whatever. It wasn't even a question that I didn't even think, because at that point I was just like, oh, the police are here. Kunle, just calm down. We'll be okay. I gave them all the proper identification, and all of a sudden they were asking me to come out of the car, right? And I'm coming out of the car, and this is just right around the time where like Kunle had, finally like put on his own seatbelt. Like we didn't have to do it for him. He put on his own seatbelt, and he wouldn't like open the door to the car or anything. He would just kind of just sit there, grab the handle, and just dance and just do his own thing. So he sees me get out of the car, and he's still relatively calm at that point. But all of a sudden, then I was like told to be like put my hands on the hood of the car, and I'm on the hood of the car, and these guys, I believe there were two officers. There might have been more that came after that, but I know at that present moment there were two officers. So I was right in the front of the car, on the hood of the car, and Kunle was just kind of just watching me, and then. I don't know if it's like as we know now, it's more of a comfort thing, or maybe it could be either a comfort thing or a sense of like nervousness, in which he starts to rock forward and back. So I mean, there's two different rocks. Like there's like the forward and back rock in which he's dancing, and then there's that forward and rock back in which he's just in turbo mode. You know what I mean? That's how he's really either agitated or really nervous, or he just doesn't understand what's going on. And I think that's like his thing of comfort or whatever it may be. And he went from the slow rock, and I could just see him because I was on the hood, to like the turbo rock. And he was moving just bomb, 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 forward and back. And at that point, that's when the officers called in. I'm like, yo, what's up with the guy in the passenger seat? And I kept telling them that, he can't talk. And it wasn't the way I always describe Kunle. I didn't like, it wasn't like the how it is now, as far as like, there's he's on the spectrum, he's autistic or whatever it is. It was at that point, it was like, oh, your brother's a retard. And that word to me, I always hated that word. You know what I mean? So my description was, I guess I could have been more descriptive, but my description was, he can't talk. He can't talk. I just remember feeling at that point like, man, like, do not do anything to my brother. You know what I mean? Don't do anything. Do whatever you want to me. Mind you, we didn't do anything wrong. I still don't even know why we're even in this position. And it was like, just don't do anything to my brother because he's innocent. You know what I mean? Like, he had no idea what was going on. And I remember them screaming something like along the line. A lot of this is like kind of like, I don't know if I like blocked it from my memory, or it was just like one of those times in your life where you're just like, like an out of body experience type thing. But I just remember them going over to the passenger side and saying, get out of the car, get out of the car. And they're literally screaming at this kid. And I'm just thinking like, he may or may not understand what they're saying, but in his mind, he's looking at his older brother on the hood of the car, and he's looking like, man, my whole world, this is obviously autistic. People are on the spectrum. They like everything in a routine, everything the same. So when something comes that's different than it's out of their norm, it throws them completely off. So now that I know more about that, I can only imagine the things that were going on in his mind and his body. They're like, get out of the car, get out of the car. And I just kept screaming, he can't talk, leave him alone, leave him alone. And I don't know what came over them or what transpired exactly after that particular point, what exactly transpired, because it was almost like as quickly as it all happened, as quickly as we got pulled over, I'm out of the car. I'm on the hood. Kunle's rocking back and forth. All of a sudden, it was like, okay, you guys are good. Here's your license and registration. Have a good evening.
Intersectionality manifests itself in multiple ways throughout society, including in IEP meetings. On the surface, it may look like a simple meeting between a parent, teacher, school administrators. But sometimes, now that we know more about mental health, there are visitors in the room that we may not be able to see. That's PTSD, that's anxiety, that's genuine fear of the future for your child. There are unmet expectations. There are broken dreams. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward as a society. The lack of community partnerships, because the wholeness of Kunle was not addressed, the wholeness of our entire family unit was not addressed as well. And that manifests itself in community partnerships. At that time, we're now talking about late 90s, early 2000s, we did have that limited universe of adult transition services. But beyond that, the greater community wasn't ready. So there wasn't policing with neurodivergence and disability in mind. There weren't city services the way there are now in the city we live in, and I'll explain that later. We felt very much alone. To underscore that, there is a term that I'm sure some of you in the room have heard called the cliff. And that is used, I first heard it when a child psychologist told me. And it refers to the dwindling of services over time for someone who's disabled from birth, from cradle to grave. And when we look at this greater community that's supposed to be the feeder from the special education system, we got a lot of explaining to do. My parents are approaching 80 years old, caring for a near middle-aged man. The baton will soon be passed on to me and my other brother in some way, shape, or form. There are two 2009 studies published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders that show that mothers of some adolescents with autism and some adults with autism have the stress level that matches those of soldiers in combat. To further underscore the greater US economy, back to thinking with the generational mindset, we are all interconnected. At least according to one 2021 study, we have a situation that there are about 36 billion hours of unpaid family caregiving that happens in the United States. And you see the price tag on this, $600 billion. My brother is my life's greatest teacher. He's taught me too many lessons. Again, that's a whole nother speech. But this particular lesson that I wanted to highlight, because time waits for none of us, we must be unapologetic about the answers we seek, even if those answers are unfavorable. So, I had a little bit of a transition of my own, because God wanted to keep it spicy. So, I'm not only a sibling advocate, I'm now a parent-sibling advocate, and I now have 2 babies on the autism spectrum, diagnosed about a year apart, again, spicy. I'd say maybe like paprika, maybe not yet ghost pepper. So I'm here before all of you today for my people. Use case 2, the family philosopher, my firstborn, Lola Dada-Olley. He is chronologically 12, but in his mind, he's 35. And just to give you a little bit of what I'm dealing with in my house, so please pray for me. So he introduced himself on the podcast when we launched it about 3 years ago, so he was 9 at the time. I'll let him introduce himself, but a quick disclaimer. Back then, he described himself with functioning labels, and we understand that the nomenclature has changed. So in our home, we realize that our daughter has higher support needs than our son. So just wanted to give that disclaimer. With that in mind, Fela.
Introducing our son, Fela.
Hi, I'm Fela. I'm 9 years old. I'm on the spectrum, but I'm on the higher functioning side of it.
Describe what autism means to you.
For me, autism is basically where your brain works differently than others.
It's an excellent definition. Can you describe some of the challenges you face as someone who lives with autism?
Some of the challenges that I face are that I'm not exactly the best at social skills. Most of the time, when I have a small problem, I have a big reaction.
And how do you work through those challenges?
When I get mad, I usually breathe deeply. It really helps. Actually really helps.
Good. One day at a time, baby boy, one day at a time.
Baby boy was diagnosed with autism about 2.5 years old. And between the ages of 18 months old and 2.5 years old, tell me if this sounds familiar, he was speaking in complete sentences, had great eye contact, was a man of the people, just like his uncle. And then he began a road towards regression in speech. But Fela's growing up in a more tolerant era, a more aware era, a more accepting era. And he has resources that my parents could only dream about. I want to underscore the prevalence of autism between my brother's diagnosis and my son's diagnosis, because there has been more awareness, which has led to more measurement of this diagnosis. Since I know people, the data folks in the room, this is for you. I'm a lawyer, I like words, but I understand the numbers are important. So at one point, 1 in every 44 children was diagnosed with autism in 2018. The reason why I highlight that year is because the CDC measured 8-year-olds, and that was the year my son was 8. So in his class, I like to call it, it was 1 in every 44. Just 2 years later, it was 1 in 36. If you take into the mix autism, intellectual disability, and developmental delay, according to at least one source in the current day, we're talking 1 in every 10 children. So we know when it comes to prevalence is one thing, but I think everyone in this room understands we could measure all day. If the resources don't match the level of prevalence found, especially when we start breaking down by zip code, we got a lot of splaining to do. Transitions. Where Kunle's transitions were focused on life phase, Fela's transitions were more life phase plus. So it involved fluctuation in parent incomes based on, which of course affected private healthcare options. It involved moving across the country to a new state. Again, God wanted to keep it spicy. So different states administer services slightly differently. So we had to adjust to all those transitions. So Fela's special education journey, it looked like in state 1, it looked like a great special ed teacher, school speech services, and then an entire private healthcare therapy team, like a whole army. So speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, feeding therapy, behavioral therapy. There was enough collaboration across those worlds, again, the breaking down of the silos that were so important, that Fela was now mainstreamed in the new state. So he was in general ed with very strong special ed, social skills focused supports. Then, because again, the spiciness of life, it was clear that he would need GT services. So we're now dealing with a child that needs both special ed and GT. We did that for a couple of years, and now we're on the brink of adolescence. So being on the brink of adolescence now means that we have looked at private healthcare in collaboration with his schooling. So we have the social skills special ed who collaborates with the cognitive behavioral therapist, so he has the coping mechanisms he needs as he enters this new phase of life. Community partnerships, again, that Kunle simply didn't have. In our city, we have access to private healthcare, we have access to special ed, general ed, with solid evidence-based work behind it and city services. We look at educators as generation builders and inclusive design architects. That's how we view it in our home. So when we go about partnering, we have that in mind so that our kids develop not only academically, but socio-emotionally. I really need to highlight the teachers in my presentation. I will go as fast as I can. Juliana Armstrong in our new state, she is amazing. She's an inclusive design architect. She broke down silos. She partnered with not only internal stakeholders for my son, but reached across the aisle to private healthcare. So much so that she had private healthcare providers sitting in her classroom so that they can observe, so that Fela's positive behaviors could be better generalized across all environments. We have a very unapologetic approach because we see the adult version of what can happen when you don't get what you need. So that looks like an elementary school world tour. At one point in our new state, we interviewed 10 different schools. I can't go that deep into the story anymore, but it was a lot. But we were intentional, and we ended up with a great partnership with the local school. The lesson learned here is that vulnerability is powerful. It doesn't always get you the answers you're seeking, but it's the conduit to authentic allyship. Use case 3. Baby girl, if you're already praying for me, add on some prayers, please. Because my baby girl is entering tweenness, and I feel it. She is 10 years old, minimally verbal, maximum opinions, uses an AAC device along with the minimal speech she has, and I'll let her introduce herself quickly.
Please welcome our daughter, Alero. She will be communicating both verbally and through her iPad, her communication device. Say hi, Alero.
I,
How are you? What's your name?
oh,
How old are you?
I'm 7 years old.
Bye.
bye.
Alero is resilience personified. She continues to add to her vocabulary and is showing improvement in both her expressive and receptive communication.
Alero's autism diagnosis came about a year after my son's, but hers took on a different form. She was born not breathing, so her version is autism, intellectual disability, and also apraxia. So learning how to speak, she has difficulty doing so. But the approach doesn't change. We're still very unapologetic on making sure that we forge authentic community partnerships. And her healthcare considerations are different. So where we were very happy to see collaboration with Fela between the private healthcare world and the public education world, with her it's paramount. And that looks like regular status calls between those two worlds. That also looks like the sharing of confidential information to get the full context of our girl. Transitions for her have changed, especially in light of the pandemic, because we're dealing with a high-touch child. So pre-pandemic, it was the best of times. She was in an experiential learning classroom, so all of those kids in that classroom were cognitively between 12 and 36 months old. Also a medically fragile classroom. She attended those in the morning, and then midday, she'd get picked up and taken to the private therapy side of life, various forms of therapy. Her days for years was 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then the pandemic hit, hence the worst of times. Things were a lot different for a very high-touch child. We had a great education system, but it was hard at times for her to learn virtually. So in this season, especially since she's now on the brink of adolescence, there's a strong emphasis now on private healthcare providers so that we can prepare her for the sensory challenges associated with transitioning from little girl to teenage autistic girl with intellectual disabilities. The community partnerships, very intentional. We live in a city where there is a hospital that specializes in autism and developmental disabilities. We live in a city with an adaptive parks and recreation system for people with disabilities. Same thing with our library system, seasoned special education teachers. And we live in a city with police that are trained in de-escalation practices with neurodivergence and disability in mind. That's the level of cohesion we sought out. We know that there's a level of privilege associated with that. Obviously, this does not exist in every zip code. But again, the importance of employing that generational mindset so that we're better at that interconnectivity needed so that you don't need this level of intentionality just to live. Hope is the cornerstone of a generational mindset. I call these people hope multipliers. Hope detractors need not apply. Gail Brooker is a hope multiplier. She's an inclusive design architect. She's a generation builder. She is Alero's special education teacher from kindergarten through the pandemic. She too, no egos, no turf war. She broke down silos. She cross-collaborated. There's emerging research that shows that your work is not in vain. It's not in vain. And there's emerging research showing that there could be a boost of IQ in adults with intellectual disabilities in post-secondary programs. So keep watering that soil, because it will bear fruit, and it does bear fruit. Huge lesson learned. Incremental progress is still progress. Let's not, as the old saying goes, let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. We have an unprecedented opportunity. Unprecedented. COVID-19 is and was tragic, yes, but it showed us that the myth of the self-made person is a lie. We are all interconnected, every single one of us. Look at what happened when these schools were shut down, how it affected the community, how it affected the entire US economy. There are inclusive design architects in this room. We all have the potential to be. We can redefine success. Like you said, it doesn't have to be based on 2019 standards. We can redefine this. We can break down silos. And we can create and collaborate on wins that are sustainable. Tambra Reynolds, another inclusive design architect, I quickly want to highlight her. She's in general ed, but she cross-collaborated across special ed, across private healthcare. So, educators, policymakers in the room, what can we tweak? What project, what initiative, what policy, what procedure, what practice, what tactic can we tweak with an emphasis on more of a generational mindset? Yes, it's challenging, but what in life is not? We can do this. The next generation is counting on it. Thank you.